Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Remember, go on Crusade channel, kick the tires, look under the hood. We know you're going to want to be a subscriber. We're going to jump right in tonight. I just want to give everybody a brief rundown on the show. We are very pleased and honored to be welcoming back to the program Prime Minister of East Turkestan in exile. All right, Salih Hudayar. He came on Joe's show with me. This was a couple of months ago for the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, and where we wanted to have him back to talk to our audience here on the Crusade channel about different things going on, particularly the antics of the Chinese Communist Party. I can't think of anybody who's more qualified to talk about that than the Prime Minister. After that, we're going to have on Frank Moore, because, Joe, evidently crime is not a problem in New York City. I don't know if anybody told you. Eric Adams, evidently, crime's not a problem. It's just kind of perception, Joe. It's perception. And then after the two great interviews that we're going to have, our two great guests, we want to talk to you a little bit about the hypocrisy of the media vis-a-vis Lara Logan, who's been banned from Newsmax, okay, and Michael Steele, who said some pretty disgusting things, I think, Joe Resinello, but MSNBC embraces him. And we got clips on both of those for you. So you're definitely going to love this tonight at the Crusade channel. And remember, go to crusadechannel.com, because Mike Church is going to be providing election night coverage. So we're promoting that. I'm taking off from work on election night because I'm going to have the Crusade channel on in my home. And I'll be following the election that way. So having said that, let's jump right into it. Joe Resinello, we're welcoming back to the program Salih Hudayar. So, John, if you want to bring in Salih, we want to introduce him to our audience. And thank you, Prime Minister, for joining us here again at the Frontline with Joe and Joe.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Real quick, for those of you who do not know, Prime Minister Hudayar was elected Prime Minister of East Turkestan in exile on November 11, 2019. He was born to a Uyghur business family in Atush, East Turkestan. He studied international studies and politics at the University of Oklahoma and was a member of the Army National Guard from 2011 to 2013. He's currently pursuing a master's in national security studies from the American Military University. On June 4, 2000, Salih Hudayar fled to the United States with his family, where they became political refugees. He grew up in Oklahoma, and despite being so young, he began to spread the awareness about East Turkestan and the situation there. He is also fluent in Uyghur, Turkish, and English. He's married and currently resides with his wife in Northern Virginia. So thank you once again, Prime Minister. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joe Resinello.
Prime Minister, let me set the stage for those who may not know what's going on with your people. October 13th, 1949, the Chinese Communist People's Army invaded East Turkestan and overthrew the independent East Turkestan Republic on December 22nd, 1949. Chinese authorities have been accused of imposing forced labor, mass internment, forced birth control, erasing Uyghur culture and religious identity, and separating children from their incarcerated parents. Can you elaborate on these human rights violations?
Yes. Since October 12th, as you mentioned, 1949, China has been waging a brutal campaign of colonization and occupation, which has proliferated to genocide since May 2014, when the Chinese government, under the directive of Xi Jinping, launched a so-called People's War against Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples. Subsequently, they began to engage in the mass arrest, internment of at least 3 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples. Again, this is according to the U.S. Department of Defense from back in May of 2019, in concentration camps, or what the Chinese government calls vocational training camps. At the same time, the Chinese government began to forcibly sterilize hundreds of thousands of Uyghur women, forcing tens of thousands of Uyghur women to marry Chinese men, uh, while at the same time separating over 850,000 children from their families. And not all of their family members were in the concentration camps. For example, some of them, even if their parents were in the concentration camps, they still had, grandparents or other relatives that could look after them. But the Chinese government's goal in putting these, in separating these children from their families is to quote, indoctrinate them into becoming loyal Chinese citizens, end quote. This is the official narrative of the Chinese government behind this policy. In the camps, people were subject to forced sterilization, starvation, forced medical experimentation, organ harvesting, 14 to 16 hours of a constant indoctrination, where they were forced to denounce their own ethnic and religious identity and embrace Chinese communism and Chinese identity. While this also happened, people were dying in these camps. The Chinese government has stated that many of these people died as a result of tuberculosis and diseases. But we can't really be sure because there are suspicions. There are facts, evidence that many people were being killed for their organs. In fact, in many of these concentration camps, there were crematoriums nearby, and in the concentration camps that were around the airports, there were special lanes at airports that said that that had special lanes only for organ transplants only. And with testimonies of Chinese doctors and foreign tourists, organ tourists, mostly wealthy Muslims from the Middle East, they would get so-called halal organs, meaning these are or organs from Muslims who have adhered to the strict Islamic dietary conditions, and they would just order an organ and would receive it within a few days. And this is a sad reality that's happening inside the camps. While at the same time you had many people in the camps being used as slave labor to produce the cheap products, from everything from textiles, from clothing to shoes to electronic components that are used in computers, phones, and other electronic equipment. This also, they also were forced to use as slave labor to produce, to pick cotton, to engage in mining activities, and produce, polysilicon, which is necessary for green energy, like creating solar panels. And in 2014, solar panel production or polysilicon production in East Turkestan amounted for only 9% of the global production. By 2021, that has reached over 55%.
Prime Minister Salih Hudayar is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello on the Crusade Channel. Joe and I, a constant point that we hammer all the time, Mr. Prime Minister, is on the one hand, the American businesses. Now, if you disagree with this assessment, please let us know. American capitalist businessmen doing business with China, turning a blind eye to what they know are Chinese atrocities. Now, you're talking about Chinese, their oppression of the people of East Turkestan and the Uyghur community. We as Catholics, we have a major issue with China, and yet you have American businessmen that have no problem whatsoever, because there's a financial interest involved in doing business with communist China. but on and along those lines, on October 6, 2022, the UN Human Rights Council rejected a motion to debate China's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity against Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan. Please comment on the turning the blind eye on the one hand in America, and everybody wants to do business with China, and also the actions of the UN.
Yes, since 2021, January 2021, during the last few days of the Trump administration, U.S. Secretary of State, then U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, officially designated China's atrocities against Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples as genocide. This was followed by similar designations by the parliaments of Canada and many EU European countries. However, the UN, stood silent. In fact, in the last day of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, after extensive pressure by international governments, she released a weak report stating that the Chinese government, some of the things that they were doing to the Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples may constitute as crimes against humanity, failing to acknowledge the genocide. But the U.S. and other countries tried to put a motion in the UN Human Rights Council to call for a debate on the atrocities, the genocide of the Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples. But sadly, the UN Human Rights Council voted largely, actually by a very small margin of 2 countries against this. And the most humiliating or the most atrocious part of this is the fact that the countries that voted against this, many of them were Muslim countries, like Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and others. And China used this as a victory to state that there is no genocide happening, and that the situation in East Turkestan, it's not about human rights or fundamental freedoms or genocide, but rather about so-called anti-terrorism and anti-separatism.
Thank you for that, Mr. Prime Minister. Joe Resinello.
September 21, 2022, President Joe Biden addressed the UN General Assembly, highlighting a multitude of critical issues across the globe. With that said, the Uyghur community was very disheartened by the U.S. president and the Turkish president's failure to adequately address China's ongoing genocide at the UN. Why are they so afraid, Prime Minister, to speak out against China? I mean, to be honest with you, if you ask me, this is the most dangerous nation on the globe.
Well, in the case of the United States, I mean, the Biden administration had followed on with the Trump administration's designation of the genocide. And Secretary Blinken had extensively, spoken out against this. However, President Biden, he has failed to even, talk about the genocide or condemn China's genocide. And this was reflected in his UN speech. And I think this is because of, close business ties, people around the president or who has the president's ear, they have, either close business ties with China, or they have investments in companies that are doing business with China. And I think that's the primary reason here. Whereas in terms of Turkey, Turkey has long actually been cooperating with China to suppress the Uyghurs, to help them, justify the genocide of the Uyghurs. So Turkey was naturally carrying on in that process. And that's why in Erdogan's statement, he made it, very clear while he talked about Palestine and Kashmir and their rights, their independence, their self-determination, etc. When it came to the Uyghurs, he said that, We want to see them have a little bit of freedom under the sovereignty, while safeguarding the sovereignty and so-called territorial integrity of the People's Republic of China. And what's important here is the Turkic people originate from East Turkestan. They migrated westward after the Mongol invasion of Central Asia, westward towards Anatolia, into modern day Turkey. So this was like a huge betrayal by Turkey against East Turkestan.
Thank you for that, Mr. Prime Minister. We on radio, we run a little bit short of time, but we want to thank you for coming on and talking about this. Joe and I are of the opinion that, listen, people complain about atrocities and genocides and crimes against humanity. You grew up with it. I grew up with it, Joe. This is what you learn in school. But now we're watching it unfold right before our eyes, and nobody does a damn thing about it. Nobody's willing to. And I get from the conversation with you, Salih Hudayar, joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, is that it all comes down, or not all, much of this comes down to economic interests and money. Your final comments. We have about a minute left, Mr. Prime Minister.
Yes, now that Xi Jinping has secured another term, probably a term for life as dictator of China, we feel this is going to have catastrophic, consequences for the people of East Turkestan. China is going to further intensify its genocide of Uyghurs because the international community is failing to act. And this is going to have, other negative consequences to the international community, given that China is going to start possibly invading Taiwan and exporting its oppression to other parts of the world. So the world needs to act before it's too late. And time is truly running out for the Uyghur people and the people of East Turkestan.
Well, that's why we have to raise our voices up, okay? Because, things like this cannot stand. We have to do whatever we can. Mr. Prime Minister, where can our audience learn more about the situation? And if so, choose to contribute and help your cause?
Yes, they can learn more on our website, nationalawakening.org, or by following us on social media at ETExileGov or at ETAwakening.
Okay, Salih Hudayar, Prime Minister in exile of the Turkestan government, thank you so much for coming back on the Frontline with Joe and Joe. You're welcome on our show anytime, our friend, anytime you like.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Joe Rossinello, I got to tell you, it's like, all the times, all the time growing up, right? You learn about this atrocity, you learn about that atrocity, you learn about all these things, but then you realize as you study history, the reason why this stuff happens is because people let it happen, Joe. Okay, it's the bottom line. Nobody's unclear or unsure about what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. Okay, nobody. Everybody knows what they're doing. Everybody knows. We as Catholics we know what they're doing to the Catholic Church. Okay, and that's another conversation for another day. Joe, why do we have to wait all the time for the atrocity to play itself out when we could do something about it? We're going to bring on Frank Moore in a minute, but Joe, I'd love your final comments on that.
Money, Joseph. Like we always say, people are afraid. China does not play games, and they use leverage, and leverage works, and they're not ashamed or afraid to do it. And people know that. And that's why they react. They own the World Health Organization. They own the UN. And a lot of businesses in America make billions of dollars from their interactions with them. And that's why they do nothing. And it's a sad, sad day when you see and hear what that gentleman just said. What's going on in the world? We hear these phrases many times, never again. Well, it's happening right now. What are we going to do about it?
Well, Joe, that is the question we have to see. It really, I think you said it correctly, Joe. It's sad that much of this, not all of this, some of this comes down to ideology, Joe. We won't get into that tonight at the Crusade channel, always in air and always online. But it is sad that much of this just comes down to the almighty dollar, okay? It'll cost me more money to speak out against China, so therefore I won't. And that's many, many American corporations. Now, Joe, there are crimes against humanity. And then there's everyday crimes, okay? And, and one of the places where everyday crime, unless you're the mayor of New York City, all right, where everyday crime has gone through the roof, okay, the only person who says it's not is the mayor, is New York City, like I said. And you want to know what? It's a lot of BS. It's just a lot of BS what's going on. And you know what? We're bringing on our friend Frank Moore to join us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel. Always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com to talk about that. Frank's a troublemaker, so, and that's why we love having him on the show, because we're troublemakers. And how are we troublemakers? Because we like to tell the truth about these things. So, John, can we bring on Frank Moore?
Frank, good to see you.
All right. You guys ready to get into the breach?
Yeah,
we're ready, brother.
We're ready, brother. Frank Moore is joining us here. Quick bio for those of you who are not familiar with Frank. He's retired FDNY, born and raised in the Bronx. Go Yankees. New York. Moore earned a bachelor's of science in business administration from Manhattan College. He worked in banking for nearly 6 years in Midtown, left the business world to become a firefighter and never looked back. Eventually promoted to lieutenant. He was assigned to Division 6, covering the South Bronx and Harlem. He's written and spoken of his experiences on 9/11/2001 and his passion for God and country since retiring from the New York City Fire Department. He's done graduate level work in religious studies at St. Joseph Seminary in Yonkers, and is a fellow of the Acton Institute in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Frank Moore, welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe, brother.
Yeah, baby. Man, that bio sounds good.
Yeah, well, it's yours, bro. It's yours. Joe Resinello, where do you want to go? Because we're talking about New York City. We're talking about crime. I just have to take a step back and take a little sip of my drink before we get to the conversation.
Frank, overall, the crime index in NYC increased in July 2022 by 30.5% compared to July 2021. Break it down for us. Why? I'm sure you got a lot of buddies who were cops, retired NYPD, firemen who are still on the job. What's going on?
Well, we're talking about good and evil, right? When we're talking about crime. And it's pretty obvious that if you are not going to prosecute a crime, then nobody is really, there's nothing to lose. So this is where we are. This is kind of common sense. And I think we're living in a time where common sense is missing.
There's no question. It seems that we always say that common sense isn't common anymore. You're 100% correct.
But Frank, let me ask you this, okay? Frank Moore joining us here. The people, what makes the people of New York? Now, again, Joe and I are Jersey guys, okay? But we both have been in the city for decades of our lives working, okay? We're very familiar with New York City. Doesn't crime affect you no matter who you are? When you got a guy, I say we because I consider myself partly New York because of having worked there. We had de Blasio. People voted for him. People voted for Eric Adams. Don't people see through their nonsense? Don't people want to be protected by the cops? What person in their right mind would vote for a guy to become mayor of New York City if they're not going to fight tooth and nail against crime? Talk about that, Frank, because to me, I'm baffled, brother.
Well, when I grew up in the Bronx, in South Bronx, about 7 blocks north of Yankee Stadium, in the 70s, when there was a lot of crime. And they keep going back to that era. But there's a difference between what we're seeing today and what we saw back then. Me being in the middle of it, the one difference is that you had respect for law enforcement. As a matter of fact, I remember in the newspapers, the NYPD took out an ad and said, just remember, we're the biggest gang in New York City. And so, they took care of business. The criminal element knew that they were there. And the difference is also that the criminal element in New York, they were New Yorkers. I don't know if that makes sense, but, you go back to the 70s and people came from New York, criminal or, honest people. Today, you've got MS-13 gangs, you got South American gangs, you got people that are coming from all over the place, and they know that this is just a rich haven for them to just walk willy-nilly over everything.
Well, Frank, listen, I'm going to hand it over to Joe, but I was working during the summer of 2020. I was working in the city in Midtown, not for nothing. I'm not a scared guy. I don't walk down the street, constantly like nervous about everything. I'm looking over my shoulder, man. And I didn't do that for a number of years. And yes, I didn't do it when Giuliani was mayor. And even to his defense, not towards the end of his mayoralty, Mike Bloomberg too, who correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, he pretty much enforced the law. Nowadays, before I left and came to Arizona, all right, which I did a few months ago, working in New York City, brother, I'm looking over my shoulder, and I mean more so than just a normal looking over your shoulder. Because guess what? There's actually, you know what? Joe wanted to ask about Alvin Bragg, so I'm going to segue from what I just said over to Joe, and you can maybe address this.
I've heard a lot of things about Alvin Bragg, particularly when there was that shooting where that young police officer was killed. There was a lot of coverage at St. Patrick's. His wife, she was like 22 years old. She spoke. She made some very critical comments about the DA. For those who don't know, Alvin Bragg is the DA, Manhattan's DA. Clearly, he's saying to his people not to bother to prosecute basically small crime, petty crime, fare beating, people who are trying to jump the subways, resisting arrest, other nonviolent crimes. To be honest, it doesn't seem like his strategy's working. I remember when that gentleman's widow spoke at St. Patrick's, she was very critical of him. It was a very emotional speech. What are your thoughts on the DA? I'll be truthful with you. It doesn't seem like he's doing too good of a job, and I don't think he has the police support.
Well, I mean, once again, we get back to common sense. And the first thing I would say is that resisting arrest actually is a violent crime. So anytime that stop resisting arrest, all right, if you want to stop pointing a finger at police, then let them do their job, all right, and you can hash it out later on. That is not something that ever existed. I have police in my family. I was just talking to a friend of mine. He just recently retired, and third generation. So he had his grandfather's badge that he turned in, and he was almost in tears. What he was telling me was that this is the first generation. He told his son, who was interested in becoming an NYPD officer, that no, I don't want you to do that. So this is the first time. For a police officer to do that after 3 generations is telling you something about the lack of respect. And without policing, you don't have justice. And since we are talking about our faith, I pulled out of Isaiah. Isaiah in chapter 42 is also repeated by Matthew in the gospel. Just says, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one. He shall bring forth justice to the nations." Christianity is about justice. A nation without justice is evil. It's immoral. You're not actually promoting morality. You're promoting immorality, and you're encouraging it. So Alvin Bragg, to me, he's just not doing his job. Whatever he's doing, he's encouraging this behavior, and I can't for the life of me know why he hasn't been called out on the carpet for it, because except for the fact that this is all a corrupt institution that's going on in New York City, because it does not make sense. It's not common sense. And you're talking about subway crime. I think that subway crime was that's up 70, some ridiculous number. Mm-hmm. And if you live in New York, and you guys know, because you're both guys from down here, if you can't use the subways, you can't use New York. I mean, the 5 boroughs, you're not driving a car around. You have to get on a train. You have to get on a bus. So, I mean, this is just madness.
Well, Frank, let me ask you this. Frank Moore joining us at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel. You mentioned the Bronx and the police department in the 1970s. It's funny you mentioned that. A couple of weeks ago, I just watched Serpico for about the 50th time, okay? Sidney Lumet picture. And I bring that up for a reason. All Sidney Lumet pictures, it seemed, centered around corruption amongst the cops, okay? And that's correct, because a guy like you who knows so many cops and knows that, yeah, there's corruption in every, you mentioned being Catholic. We know there's corruption in every institution made up of human beings, okay? There's always going to be a certain level of that. This is not some cops getting paid off in the Bronx or in Brooklyn or something like. This is the wholesale destruction of the NYPD. And it leads one to have to ask themselves, is this by design? You have DAs across the country that say they're not going to prosecute certain crimes. Okay, New York City, maybe it starts with fare beating and all that stuff, resisting arrest. Okay, we know from history, recent history under Giuliani, no, those are the crimes you got to prosecute, because those guys, guess what? They actually are the real criminals. They got rap sheets as long as your arm, and crime went down. But it seems to me this is a deliberate attempt to destroy what you talked about just now, Frank. The implementing justice, in this case in New York City, okay, because that's what the cops do. I think you could call me a conspiracy theorist all you want. I think that this is by design, by the Soros types, to undermine the authority of the police, the legitimate authority of the legitimate police force. Frank, we have a few minutes. Go ahead. I want you to go off on that.
I'm smiling because you just took the words out of my mouth. I was just thinking about Soros and mentioning him, and then you just said it. I mean, and it's not just Soros, folks. The Soros has funded a lot of these attorney generals they're scattered all over the country, working mayhem. But he's been very clear, and I invite your audience to just look up his speeches, and you'll see that he's really about undermining democracy. And this is not an accident. He's doing it all over the globe. But New York City, since that's what we're talking about, New York City with Alvin Bragg and the mayor, because the mayor, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Right after he was elected, he's on a subway train, and he's got people around him, and he's watching a mugging from the platform, and he's as nervous as all get-go. This is, and he's the mayor, but you don't see a whole lot of talking about it, right? They'll bury that as soon as it happens. So, how do you add on to that, except that we need to remove Alvin Bragg? We need to start over again. We need to start fresh, because the people are what make New York City, and they can't exist in this kind of an environment. This is bizarre. The New York City Police Department is demoralized. These people are retiring left and right, and I haven't seen this since 9/11, where there was a mass exodus. And when you do that, you have this vacuum, and you don't have the experience. You don't have the people to teach the new guys coming on. And I almost feel like that's part of the plan. The idea is that we're going to have an inept, stumbling police force that people are going to continue to degrade.
Frank, I'm going to hand it over to Joe for one final question, but I'm going to put together a conversation for you to come back on and join us on social media. We're going to talk about the underlying, I hate to even call them philosophical, because that gives it almost kind of a heft that we don't want to give it. But the underlying ideas behind what's going on, and I think we could really have a good time unpacking that. But we don't have enough time, because that's a longer conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Joe for one final question.
Well, Frank and Joe, Joe knows this, Frank. I take the bus into Port Authority to go to work, and last week I was coming down the escalator. The Port Authority Police Department were giving coffee out. So I walked over there, and I always, exactly that face, that's exactly what I said. So I walked over. I was like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, oh, we don't have any coffee left. I'm like, I told the guy, I was like, he's a cop. I'm like, I don't want your coffee. I want you. I want you here to protect us. That's why you're here. And it was almost like they're placating the people. Like, it's almost like, here's some coffee. Like, I don't want your coffee. I want you to stand there and protect us. That's what it's all about. And that happened last week. I didn't tell Joe Pasillo that. That is the God's honest truth. I was coming down the escalator. They had a big table out.
If you told me that on the air, I would have laughed for 5 minutes. It took up air time.
I swear, Joe, that's God. That's true.
Shaking my head the rest of the time.
That's true. That happened last week. This is
I
where
I hope he brought coffee into the police precinct.
Hey, Frank. I know we said last question, but I got along the lines of what Joe's saying. I gotta give you paint the picture for you. Just get a comment quickly from you. I always said to Joe on the show, okay, they want to be inclusive and all this, and then listen. You ask an average ethnic police officer, jacked guy. I don't care if he's black. I don't care if he's Puerto Rican, Italian, Irish. Okay, he'll say the same thing we are. Look, man, I'm sorry. This is gonna get us in trouble. I don't want the 4'11", 200-pound chick. She's not the cop I want, and that's nothing against that. But being a cop means something. And I'm going somewhere with this. You remember the scene in The Godfather where Michael Corleone's in front of the hospital, right? And Sterling Hayden plays McCluskey, and he gets out of the car and he punches Michael Corleone in the face. I got in trouble with a lot of Italian Americans over this, but here's the bottom line, Frank. When I'm in trouble, I want a guy like McCluskey who's going to come and defend me. And I know how much that, how you I think you know where I'm going with this.
Mhm.
I fear that guy in
I
a
don't want
respectful
coffee.
way. What's that? I don't want coffee from him. I don't
No.
want to get punched in the
I
face
know.
with him either.
I know where to get coffee.
That's right.
But Frank, I was joking a little bit. I'd love for you to comment on that. I want cops, and like I said, we're ethnic guys. Okay, we're from the area, from the Northeast. Okay, I don't care. Like the left always tries to couch us in racism and all that, but that's a lot of BS. Give me some jacked black guy, Puerto Rican. I don't care who he is, from the Bronx. Okay, if he's wearing blue, okay, I respect him, and he's going to protect me. Okay, and it seems like that's one of the things that guys like Alvin Bragg and Eric Adams, who was a cop, that seems like they want to get rid of. I'm going to give you the final word, Frank.
Well, we know some things about Alvin Bragg, and we know a lot of things about Eric Adams and his time on the force. But you're talking about bare knuckles fighters, and if I'm in a barroom brawl and there's a bare knuckles fighter there that means business and he's against me, yeah, I don't like that. But if I'm in trouble and he's there and he's for me, I'm damn glad that he's there. So that's the kind of cop that you want. You want somebody that's willing to get dirty, get his hands dirty. He's gonna be in the mix, and he's gonna defend. He has a code of law. He's not running willy nilly, and when he does that, he gets in trouble. So
Sure.
we want a guy to do his job, and we are finding that these guys are afraid to do their job. I had a friend of mine I played softball with, and he was out for the summer because he hurt his shoulder. I asked him, I said, where were you? And he said, I injured myself and on the job. He was making an arrest in one of the buildings in Manhattan. And he turned around, the guy wrestled him through a plate glass window and tore up his shoulder. And he said he was trying to take the guy's gun to shoot him. And I said, well, why didn't you shoot him? If this guy's trying to shoot you with your own, he goes, are you kidding me? If I shoot that guy, then, who knows what's going to happen. That's the way they're thinking now. And I don't know how you can even do that job. I mean, I'm looking at my friend's son. I would be telling him, hey, you know what? You go become an accountant or something, because that job is not respected. And until they respect it, and I think that people are starting to respect it now, but they're respecting it the hard way. By things not getting done and by themselves being put in danger because there is no policing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Frank,
we had
listen.
Images. Yeah, go ahead.
No, please. You had images. Go ahead.
Images in 2020 of cops in Harlem being surrounded and having water dumped on their head. I mean, this is the total indignation, they just no respect. And that goes one step further. That they were lucky that that's all that was in there. Because we've seen episodes where that liquid is not water. So
Right.
if these guys are that vulnerable, then you're just waiting for a horror story.
No, Frank, listen, I'm just going to leave you with this. And like I said, Frank, we'll have you back. We're going to talk about policing with you and in general, and some of the underlying philosophical concepts that the other side is trying to push. But I lived in Brooklyn. When I got married, I lived in Brooklyn for 3 years, from 2013 to 2016. I worked there for, like I said, for decades. I was there when those two cops got shot and the cops turned their back on de Blasio. Okay. Let me tell you something. If these police officers en masse turned their back on Alvin Bragg and Eric Adams, okay. Now, again, this will be a conversation for another day, and let them know, stop pushing us around, and we are not going to do anything. And then you're the mayor of the Wild Wild West, and see how long you last. Okay. And yeah, I got a union. You're still going to pay me. How's that?
They're close. They're close.
Well,
to that.
Listen, Frank, God bless them. And let's see them do that, and things turn around for the people of New York and for the cops that protect them. Frank Moore, unfortunately, we're on a time limit, so we have to leave it there. Brother, you are always welcome on this show. We're going to have you back. Right. We're going to put together a larger conversation about law enforcement and what the enemy is up to. But as always, we love you. God bless you, and thank you so much.
Amen to that. I love you guys too, man. Great show.
Talk about your book, Frank. What's the book you got out?
Oh, yeah.
There?
What's the book? Go ahead, Frank.
America the Exceptional, Restoring a Wayward Nation's Greatness. It's on Amazon. And yeah.
All right, good. And then we encourage all of our audience members to go out there. I have it right here on my shelf. All right, and the bottom line is you need to read it. Frank Moore is a great Frank. You know, I say this, you know, with humility. You're a great Catholic. You're a great inspiration for Joe and I. And you're a great American. I don't want to borrow a line from Sean Hannity, but I actually mean it. Okay, because we mean it in a little bit of a different way. But you're our brother. We love you, and thank you so much for coming on. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey, God bless you guys. And by the way, that bio that you read is on the back of the book too. So great bio. So
I wonder who wrote it. Frank Moore, thanks a lot, brother.
all right, take care.
Peace.
Take care.
That was
No,
a great
Joe,
conversation, Joe. That was great.
Yeah, well, Joe, and the thing is, it's so true. It's like you see what the enemies are trying to do, and we just seem to allow them to do it. We don't fight against it. Those who have the willingness to fight don't have the numbers to fight against it. Joe, let me tell you something. I will never regret. I like Arizona. I'm beginning to love it. Okay, I like Arizona. Okay, I liked living in New Jersey. I really did. Okay, I liked working in New York City. I really did. I don't want to do it anymore, Joe. I don't want to do it. And you want to know why? See, now where I worked, we had a precinct that was pretty spot on. You call them, they come and if there was an issue, okay. But generally speaking, my wife and I came out of the subway one day, and I remember this wasn't 10 years ago. This was not long before we left, okay. And two guys were following us. One of them, by the way, I recognized from a few weeks earlier that was begging for money in front of one of the local bars in Midtown. Okay. It's like, this is the culture that you're in New York City. And these cops, unfortunately, under de Blasio, under Eric Adams, under Alvin Bragg, they're going to be hamstrung. And Joe, they're going to lose good people. They're going to lose good people, that want to be law enforcement and are not going to be able to, or are not going to be willing to. Because Joe, guess what? I'm not going to risk my life. If the municipal government doesn't have my back, in this case, the city of New York, why would I risk my life? Joe, let me throw that over to you before we move on to the next.
Well, you make a good point. Where I live, I have a good friend who's a state trooper who lives across the street. We talk about, things a lot. I mean, to your point, why would people risk their life? Like when you don't have, there you go. Why would you risk your life if your boss doesn't have your back? And to Frank's point, you're going to get in trouble. You're simply not going to. You have a family too. You want to come home from the job. And frankly, you count on the government and your superiors to have your back. You're not doing anything wrong. You're simply doing your job. It's a tough job. It's a very tough job. And if people don't have your back, it's simply human nature. It doesn't matter if you're black. It doesn't matter if you're white. It doesn't matter if you're Asian. It doesn't matter if you're Hispanic. Frankly, cops are not going to drive fast to the scene. They're going to take their time. They're not going to be quick to jump into the fray. Who gets hurt by that? Us, the regular people. That's what's going on. To be honest with you, you can't almost fault them, because it's just self-preservation. But that's going on because of the way that we, as in the government, is treating police officers. It's a shame, and it's got to stop.
No, it really does. And Joe, that comes with our how do you call it in French? Our raison d'etre, our reason for being at this show is we're just trying to talk about these things so as to raise the consciousness of those who would listen to us on these different issues. And how does the consciousness of the people of New York City need to be raised? You need to realize the people that are running your city, they're trying to undermine what is essentially, at one point, not now, at one point was the greatest city in the world. Okay. They're undermining it. They're making it impossible to live there, to do business there. And they do that. What is the main way they do that? Is undermining the police department. Joe, you and I grew up at a time where, listen, Joe, I didn't have the greatest experience with cops growing up. I'm not going to lie. I didn't. I was a hooligan. Okay. I did not respect authority, not the way I should have. Okay. I have more respect for cops than anybody I know. Well, a lot of people I know. I understand how difficult their job is. I didn't like them. I didn't. I mean, I'm not Newark Police Department. I didn't like a lot of the guys on the Newark City and Newark Police Department when I was in my teen years, in my early 20s. Okay, got arrested a couple times. My father wasn't too happy about that. Okay, but I didn't care. And I mouthed off to them and everything else. And you want to know what? At the end of the day, regardless of what I thought about what I was doing, I was wrong. You respect cops. You show respect for police officers. Why? Because you said it earlier, and Frank alluded to it. Because they keep you safe. That's why. All right? And I learned my lesson. I think now my hooligan attitude, my rebellious attitude is now being promoted. And it's being promoted by the municipal governments, whether it's Newark, New York, Manhattan, whether it's Brooklyn, the Bronx, Chicago is the wild, wild west. There's no respect for cops in Chicago, okay? Law and order has broken down. I'm going to give you the final word, Joe, before we move on, and it's deliberate. What do you have to say?
Well, it doesn't make sense. So one has to conclude that there could be a deliberate motive here because it doesn't make sense. Human nature, the way it is, many people operate under this premise. If I can get away with it, I'm going to do it. That is why you have police officers. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you're in. You need police officers. And frankly, it's not fair to say that all police officers are bad.
Right.
It is simply not fair. And even at the worst of the worst, the percentage is not that overwhelming. Could we do a better job? Of course, we could improve on everything.
Joe, we're Roman Catholics.
Tried.
Joe,
He
let me
put
ask you something.
forth a bipartisan. I want to bring that up because I don't think it's fair. Tim Scott put forth a sincere platform to improve law enforcement. He was a poor black kid who grew up in South Carolina, and the Democrats shot it down simply because he was a Republican. That is sad.
Right.
That is sad. You know, he cried when he presented it. That's how.
But doesn't that tell you, Joe? Doesn't that tell you that there's more politics involved than what should be? The underlying question is the protection of our people, an ordered liberty within our society that's enforced. Yes, I know the left doesn't like that unless it's them enforcing what they want. It's enforced by the police. The laws are designed to protect, and the cops are the ones who enforce the law. It's that simple, okay? Why would you be opposed to that? Why? But yet they were. They made Tim Scott cry. I'm not the biggest fan of Tim Scott. He put forth good and common sense, reasonable legislation, okay, that the left should have gone along with. But it speaks to what I was saying earlier, Joe. It tells us there's an agenda. There's an underlying agenda that goes beyond that, okay? And again, we'll get into it, I'm sure, because crime is, Joe, listen, the left, they push their chips on right into the middle of the poker table, Joe, on abortion after Roe versus Wade. They pushed their chips in the middle and said, we're going to make this election about Roe versus Wade and abortion. And you want to know what? They're a loser on that. The polls are showing it. Abortion as on the priority list of issues is in the single digits. You know it's not in the single digits? Crime, okay? Along with inflation and everything, crime, all right? Pete, the American people are not going along with this nonsense. Now Joe, if you don't mind, let's pivot because we don't have a lot of time left on the Crusade channel. Always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. You know, Joe and I always talk, a lot of our conversations have to do with politics, okay? So on November 8th, election night, Mike Church and the crew down at the Crusade channel, they're going to be having election night coverage. And you need to go on the website and find out how you could avail yourself of that coverage. I'm going to have a couple of devices going when I'm here. I've already requested off that night. All of you know I work nights, okay? I've already requested off. I've already been given it off because election night is my Super Bowl, okay? Now, I don't care about the Super Bowl. I care about election night. So I'll be here, and I'll have a number of devices on, and I promise on my phone, I will be listening to the Crusade channel. So all y'all out there, okay, need to go down and go on the website and tune in and find out how you could tune in to Mike Church and Rick Barrett and election night coverage on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Joe, we went a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I want to get to this. I want to get to your comments on this, okay? And I'm really going to take a back seat. Jonathan Ross, let's play the clip from Lara Logan, who got her banned from Newsmax, okay? So
It's right out of the playbook. the right out of the socialist playbook. You divide and conquer. You don't tell them your intent. You get people to come in. You got your useful idiots, those of us who are paying for these people to have all these luxuries, and they lie about it. Yeah. How does it end?
Well, badly. It ends badly for some. Okay, so on a serious note, you know, people of all faiths have said to me that this is a spiritual battle. I am a firm and solid and immovable believer in God. And I believe that God wins. I believe that good is greater than evil. And I believe that the fallen angel, otherwise known as Satan, doesn't get to prevail in this world. So if you follow the Bible, or if you follow the Quran, or you follow the Book of Mormon, you know, people talk in various different ways about the end times. And if you fight for God, God will fight for you. But people, humanity.
Final thought, Lara. Final thought, though. I have to ask you this, because my audience is very God-fearing, God-loving, etc. Final thought. Only a couple of seconds, please. Is God okay with a closed border?
It's much bigger than that. God believes that in sovereignty and national identity and the sanctity of family and all the things that we've lived with from the beginning of time. And he knows that the open border is Satan's way of taking control of the world through all of these people who are his stooges and his servants. And they may think that they're going to become gods. That's what they tell us. Yuval Noah Harari and all the rest of them at the World Economic Forum. You know, the ones who want us eating insects, cockroaches, and that while they dine on the blood of children. Those are the people, right? They're not going to win. They're not going to win.
Well,
Joe, I'm going to throw it right over to you. Okay. Now I know you want to talk about what Eric Bolling, I think rightfully, I'm with you on that, said when he asked her about immigration. But that's not what got her cut off, though. What got her cut off as soon as she brought up Davos, the World Economic Forum, Yuval Harari, and the fact that, yes, they want us eating bugs. Now, you brought that up on the show before. Are you now going to get banned? Well, I guess what, Joe, you brought it up, so I guess we're never going on Newsmax, okay? Because you pointed out, because they've said, you know, bugs have protein, insects have protein. Why don't you just eat bugs? I don't know. I prefer a ribeye, but you want to have the ribeye, and you want me to have the cockroach, okay? Joe, I'm going to throw it over to you because I do want to leave time for, I want to juxtapose what happened to Lara Logan with the loving response when Michael Steele compared us to lice and blood-sucking ticks. But go ahead, Joe. It's all yours. You have the floor.
Well, clearly, I mean, the globalist agenda is to have open borders, and every country is entitled to a border. There's no question about that. What I will say is this, though. I think it's a uniparty issue, number one. I don't think the Republicans or the Democrats really want to resolve the issue at the border, because both of them use it as a bludgeoning stick and to fire up their base. I think it's a very easily compromised issue where we could both come together and come up with a solution. It's been tried, and both parties are reluctant to do it. I believe it's a uniparty issue. The left wants people unfettered. They don't want a border because they want to turn Arizona and Texas over to the blue. The right uses it to fire up their base. They also use it for cheap labor. They do. So if you ask me, I think this is a very doable and reasonable like way we could solve this problem. We just don't. And that's sad. That's number one. Number two, with regard to that particular video, I give the guy from Newsmax a lot of credit because he asked the question, can we shut the border? And frankly, I differ from Trump's position at the border, and I've talked to you about this regarding merit-based immigration. If we believed in merit-based immigration, my family wouldn't be here. They weren't engineers.
My mom wouldn't be here. My mom wouldn't be here.
Frank's family's from Ireland. I don't think they were doctors or like, you got to give people a chance. All I'm saying is, I think we could approach this in a reasonable, common sense manner where we allow people to come in, we vet them, we give people a chance, and at the same time, we have a border.
Right.
To me, there's an easy fix here. We refuse to do it as a nation.
Joe, it's an easy fix if you take the ideology and you throw it in the garbage and you address the situation squarely. I'm with you on it. But that's what both sides, I think, are not willing to do. A lot of the Chamber of Commerce Republicans, Joe, we mentioned earlier, we had on the Prime Minister in exile of East Turkestan. A lot of them are doing business in China, Joe. They don't care. They don't care about Uyghurs getting enslaved. They don't care about these poor people coming from south of the border who a lot of people are going to take advantage of and pay them crap wages. Okay. And then you got the left who just wants political power. Oh, come here. You get on the dole. Just vote for us. We make sure you'll get health care for your kids and all that. If you throw out the ideology, Joe, the problem is solved much more easily. Not easy, but much more easily. Jonathan Ross. Now, Lara Logan's sin with Newsmax is she mentioned something that harkened to that QAnon stuff, and she mentioned something about, they want you eating insects while they dine on baby's blood. That's what she said, okay? Let's do a little comparison, Joe Rossinello here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel. Jonathan Ross, play Michael Steele. Do me a favor. I think we might be having a little issue with the all right, so we don't have any audio on that, but let me put it like this to you. Michael Steele went on this long diatribe, okay, that Kevin McCarthy needs to learn the mistakes of the past under Newt Gingrich and Ryan and Boehner, and don't get in bed with the lice, the parasites, and the blood-sucking ticks. Now, I find it very interesting that Lara Logan got banned from a conservative news organization like Newsmax for like bringing up blood-sucking, blood-drinking, whatever, okay? And yet Michael Steele is embraced by MSNBC, Joe Rossinello, and he basically just called. Now, I believe, again, I don't pay too much attention to Michael Steele. I believe he's still a Republican. I wish he would just leave. I'm being honest with you. Just leave, Michael. Nobody needs you. Okay. People like us supported you. And now you call us parasites and blood-sucking ticks. Why, Joe, is she not able to say her mind? Okay. And she gets banned from Newsmax. And then Michael Steele could basically say that all MAGA Republicans are basically bloodsuckers. What's the difference? Why the double standard, Joe? We have about a minute and a half left. I'm just going to give it to you.
Well, the press controls the narrative. I mean, to be honest with you, it's all projection. I cannot believe what MSNBC gets away with. Tucker Carlson recently commented and drew a parallel with regard to how MSNBC approaches race to the genocide in Rwanda, how the basic media of Rwanda was the spark that caused millions of people to be slaughtered. Right. Do they want a race war? I mean, the way that they speak and generalize against people, I cannot believe it. When you watch this, and I'm not talking as a Republican, I'm talking as a human. Like, you hear this, and there is so much overt hatred that I can't believe. They say that, like, I mean, I don't even want to get into the specifics. It's sad. And I'll be truthful with you. It absolutely goes against everything that Martin Luther King spoke about. Everything that he spoke about. The tone, the generalizations, the outward prejudice against people who are not Black. I can't believe they get away with it.
Well, we, Joe Rossinello, allow them to get away with it, and we have to leave it there. We want to thank you all for joining us at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online. We want to thank Prime Minister in exile, Salih Hudayar, okay? We want to thank Frank Moore, friend of the show. Frank's got a lot to say. We're going to have Frank on a lot as we move forward, okay, to comment on a lot of things because Frank's got a lot to say. And quite frankly, he likes getting in trouble just like Joe and I do. So we're going to have Frank back. We want to thank him for coming on tonight. And Joe, we have to leave it there. I will emphasize, go on crusadechannel.com and look at how you could follow election night coverage on November 8th. I'm going to do it. Joe's going to have his phone on and be listening, okay? And I'm going to have a number of devices, but Crusade Channel is definitely going to be one of them. So I would recommend you do that. We want to thank you all out there for joining us here once again. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon. You have to go. So we want to thank everybody for joining us at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello on the Crusade Channel. And wherever you see Joe and I on social media, please like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Help us out if you can. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon. Securing your data privacy is more important than ever. Start your free privacy scan and see how much of your data is being sold on the internet. Offering data breach monitoring, bulk data removal, and agency protection, DataSeal.io is the best and most affordable way to secure your data from ending up in the wrong hands. Remove your data today from the internet with DataSeal.io. That's DataSeal.io.